Now back to the show. This is The Law Show on CL 650.
Stay, little Valentine, stay.
Ah, yes, it's our pre-Valentine show coming up quickly. And we're talking about family law on The Law Show on CL 650. David Halkett, our regular guest here, a partner at McQuarrie Hunter in Central Surrey.
Central City in Surrey.
Okay, that's alliteration almost all the way through. Yes, and that's located right on the SkyTrain line.
Yeah, it's right at the Surrey Central Station.
And what about parking?
There's the big parkade right behind, and there's also the mall parking as well.
Okay, yeah, so you can do a little shopping.
Exactly.
That's where David is at lunch.
Yes.
All right, so we talked in the first part about Valentine's Day and all the changes that come at this time of year after the new year. Now, I teased it before the break, and I'll go through these because it kind of makes sense. Reason why people get married, they fall in love. Marriage signifies a commitment, moral values. You might have the same religious beliefs. Belief that children should be part of a married couple. It's the natural thing to do, and parents and family and society says that. Financial security, we talked about religious beliefs, pressure from the family, pressure from friends. And the most Canadians that get married in the province of Newfoundland and Labrador, 54.3% get married, and the lowest is Quebec.
Yeah.
And that's the Quiet Revolution was against the Roman Catholic Church in the 60s. And it's interesting that it was probably the most religious province back then, and now
it's the least.
Now it's the least.
Yep.
And I know many people from Quebec who they are together and they have children, but they're not married.
Exactly. And although the only thing I'd say about that it's interesting is that in Quebec, when you get married, you can't take on your spouse's last name. So I don't know if that kind of skewers a bit of the stats a bit, but yeah, they do have a low marriage rate for sure.
And but that doesn't really matter in the eyes of the law. Now, we're not in the province of Quebec, but if it was here in British Columbia and you're living together, you have a child, and you're not married, in the eyes of the law, it doesn't matter, right?
No, if you're living together and you've with the child, the same rights apply. And if you live together for 2 years, it's deemed as if you are a married spouse when it comes to dealing with the legal issues of the breakup. So
how you get to the point where you want to get a divorce, in the eyes of the law, it doesn't matter. Like you can say, my husband cheated on me, The court doesn't care.
No, the causes of the divorce have no effect on like division of assets. They may have an effect on child issues because you always have to look out for what's best for the child. But you're right. In a general sense, we have no fault divorce. And so whoever was the cause, in quotes, it doesn't matter. We don't have to have a trial say, well, you were mean to me on this day, you were this, you were that, and the judge determines who's at fault. It's just you guys have been separated for a year, you're entitled to a divorce, and we deal with it.
In the eyes of the law, you have one spouse who's been faithful in the marriage, and then the other one's had an affair for 5 years, but the court doesn't care.
No.
That guy's been a dog for 5 years. Doesn't matter to the assets.
No, it doesn't. It usually, in most cases, doesn't have an effect.
Okay, now let's get into the reasons why people break up. Now, I'm not sure. Did you put this list together, or maybe you can add into what you've seen as well?
Sure. Well, I like the one that says you jumped into marriage for the wrong reasons.
I've seen that personally, yeah.
Well, in a lot of those ones, that can play into the pressure from family or pressure from friends. I'm over a certain age, so therefore all my friends are married. I should get married too, whether you wanted to or not. So that's one.
And the other one I notice is people move in together.
Yep.
And the next step is to get married, and maybe they shouldn't have moved in together.
Exactly.
They don't have the fortitude to say, okay, I'm out.
Yeah.
They keep going down the marriage.
And I think what happens sometimes is it sounds like a great idea. You're getting married, and then you get down. You may not want to. You may have second thoughts as you're going along. But how do you get out of it? Then you just have to embarrass yourself in front of everyone when that may save you long-term pain, but they don't want the short-term pain.
All right, what else do we have here?
Lost your individual identity. I think that happens a lot, that for some people they're seen as, say, Zach's wife, or in my case, David's wife. Although to me, that's never bothered me personally. I go to her office, I'm Anne's husband. It doesn't matter. But I think a lot of people, they subsume themselves.
My wife, I'm just the dummy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Who's the guy with you?
Yeah. But I think a lot of people, they subsume themselves into the spouse's life, especially if someone has to move around a lot for jobs.
Yeah, I could see that if you're in a military relationship or you work for a big company that moves you regularly.
And so your whole life has been just following the spouse around, right? And that can be a bit of an issue. I think the third one is very important. You're consumed with parental duties, because we see it just my own personal circumstances. My son plays a relatively high level of rep hockey, and so he's got 3 practices 3 nights a week. Then he's got a couple of games, and they may be travel games, and before you know it, a whole week's gone by, and you
haven't connected, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And fortunately, with my wife's schedule in mind, we both were able to go to 95% of his games together. Mm-hmm. So the hour while he's getting dressed is when we actually probably chat more.
But you have one child, right?
Yes.
So you add in a second or third, then you're totally split up.
And I know some parents that are on our team, they have 3 children, and they have in 2 sports each. I don't see how they ever see each other. So you become basically just a parent, and you forget that you're a spouse.
And that's a common mistake, is that people take on too much.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. See, we specifically limited ours, but some don't limit their child into the number of sports.
And you also have one child, so you can focus your attention.
Exactly.
All right, what other things do you see?
Share the same vision of success. That's some they want to make more money, they want to travel around and move up and some are just happy to have a relatively basic life. So if your values don't mesh over time, then that's going to cause a problem if you can't figure out a way to work around it.
And the one might be you want a traditional setup where the wife maybe stays home, or one of the spouses stays home as a traditional sort of setup. And the other one's like, I don't want anything to do with that. Exactly. I want a nanny and I want to go to work, right?
Exactly. And so that can be a bit of a problem. And especially we have in Surrey, where I am, we have a lot of different cultural groups that are there, and they may have different views. Like there may be someone who was born out of the country who's married someone that was born in Canada, and their cultural views don't mesh.
Right.
And that can be a problem.
They're of a different generation and mindset. What else do you have here?
Sex life is non-existent. I think that's more of a symptom than it is the cause. But in my experience at work, the men see that differently than the women do. Mm-hmm. It's like, we were just too tired, I couldn't. And as the guy says, well, we don't have sex anymore. Mm-hmm. And a guy thinks they're separated the minute the sex stops. Mm-hmm. And so but that's usually a symptom more than anything. Next one, unmet expectations. I think we often have expectations that are a little too high of what life will be. And, there's that old movie, Reality Bites. Well, unfortunately, that's what happens to a lot of people. And they expect it to always be like the first few months you're with someone. And when you're together for a long time, when you factor in children and...
It's a grind.
Exactly. And it's how you work your way through those. Handling finances differently. This was a big
one, I'm sure.
Yeah. So my rule of thumb has always been that people seem to get divorced for, 2 or 3 main reasons. Money's always one of them. Children is the second one. And then the sexual issues, which some may flow out of the money and the children. But the money is a big one, because if you have a lot of money, you may have one that spends too much. Mm-hmm. You may have a guy who buys, Rolex watches, that cost a lot. You may have hiding the watch, are you? Or you may have, I've had guys come in and say, all my wife does is buy Vuitton purses, and if they're not agreeable that how money should be spent, that can be a problem, especially if it gets tight.
Yeah. And that's when it's really sticky, is that one person's trying to save every penny, and the other one, and we've talked about this in the past, is you have spouses have different credit cards and different bank balances, and you have no idea that he's bought a Harley, but it's fully financed.
Exactly.
And you owe $20,000 to the bank, right?
Well, that's it. It's amazing how many people, even in 2017, come in and don't know the situation in their family finances. I don't know every dollar my wife has, and she doesn't know every dollar I have, but we have an idea of what our bank accounts are and where they're roughly at. But you have people that are savers. I had a case 5-6 years ago where one person had saved, $400,000 or $500,000 in RSPs and stuff over time. Wife had $30,000 in debt, no savings. So, of course, having to explain to him that when you separated after 20 years, you're getting all that money flowing from you that you saved while she spent, which... So
you have to settle the $30,000 credit card bill. Yeah. And by the way, whatever's left over, she gets half. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
that's a hard one to swallow.
It is. And so that can always be a problem. And so when you are together, if you can't work out your finances, that's going to be a major problem, especially if it gets tight.
So In your viewpoint from doing this for 20 years now, a little counseling here for free. What is it? Communication is really seems basic, but is it?
That's the key to everything. Like, you know, how you communicate, how you're going to handle the children, how you're going to communicate to deal with finances. If you don't communicate without one party, always getting in a huff and walking out or doing whatever, that's going to be a problem. So that's why before we can start any divorce proceedings, we have to make sure that the parties really have no prospect of getting back together. And would marriage counseling work? Maybe they just got to learn how to talk to each other better. Now,
in all the years that you've had people come into your office and are talking about the prospect of getting divorced and say they're going to try and work it out, it's a very low percentage that actually do, right?
Maybe 1% to 2%.
Right.
Because by the time they come to see me, it's over. You know, people often say, well, you break up families. I said, no, they were broken up long before they come to see me. You know, it's just how do I get them through a very difficult process in their life? And it's like it's like a death, except it's a death of relationship, not a person.
Yeah, I liken it to, you're driving a car with one wheel missing.
Exactly.
Right? It's not going to, it's very different.
Exactly.
So what we're going to do after the break is we're going to get into some of the nitty gritty here about what you do when people come into your office. And I'm sure there's a whole long period where you just let them talk. Is that sort of what happens on the first visit?
Yeah, usually the first visit, I don't do that much talking for the first half hour, say. They do a lot of talking. But it depends on each file, but that's pretty general.
Are there many people you have come in, you have to draw it out of them, or they're ready to let loose?
Usually I ask a very general question, what brings you here today? And you get an avalanche of information.
Yeah, and it's tough, right?
It is.
Are there general kinds of people you see? When you meet somebody, do you go, oh, this sort of falls into this camp or that camp?
No, I usually can tell which by the end of the meeting, but the first few minutes, it can be they just have to tell someone their story. And then once they may think that they've gone internet searching and found out, oh, I can do this and that, and then I make sure they know that what the real rights are. And
yes.
Then we go from there.
Yeah, because the internet is great, but it also can lead you astray.
Exactly.
To what, because, every jurisdiction is different.
Yeah.
We're in British Columbia. Okay, so we're getting to the sort of divorce 101 after the break about agreements, splitting up assets and all those sorts of things. David Halkett is our guest from McQuarrie Hunter. He's a partner there in Surrey. This is The Law Show on CL 650.
There's more of the show still ahead. This is The Law Show on CL 650.